I woke up at exactly 3 in the morning to a sound that didn't belong in my world. Concrete trucks, not distant traffic, not thunder. Concrete trucks idling behind my house like an invasion. I stepped onto my porch in a bathrobe, barefoot on cold wood, and what I saw stole the air from my lungs. Willow Creek, the creek my wife loved more than anything, was being strangled by fresh concrete, a dam. Built overnight, illegal, permanent, and heartless. That creek was Martha's refuge during chemotherapy. When the pain meds failed, she'd ask me to open the window so she could hear the water. She said it reminded her that life kept moving, even when her body struggled to. We planted oak trees along that creek during her remission. Each one marked a victory. Each one meant hope. And now water was backing up, drowning their roots. Then I saw her, Veronica Ashworth, HOA president, standing there with crossed arms and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. I demanded an explanation. She didn't even hesitate. Mosquito control, she said. Deal with it. That was the moment something inside me hardened. What she didn't know was that I spent 30 years as an EPA water quality specialist. I know wetland law the way surgeons know anatomy. Every regulation, every loophole, every consequence. She assumed I was just a grieving old man clinging to memories. She assumed wrong. By noon, my basement was flooding for the first time in 32 years. Brown water crept through foundation cracks that had never leaked before. Worse, the oak grove Martha planted was slowly drowning. I called Veronica. She blamed natural drainage issues. A lie so clean it felt rehearsed. I documented everything. GPS coordinates, photographs, water contamination readings, federal violations stacked on top of state violations like dominoes. 3 days later, a county inspector called and said no violations were found. Case closed. That's when I knew this wasn't incompetence. It was corruption. I drove to the HOA clubhouse. Veronica was tending roses that had never known dirt. She smiled when she saw me, smiled like someone who thought money erased laws. When I confronted the inspector directly, his tone changed, defensive, nervous, suggesting I work with the HOA. That night I sat alone in my kitchen, surrounded by Martha's things, and made a decision. I wasn't just fighting for property. I was fighting for the last place my wife ever felt peace. And I was done playing nice. This wasn't over. Not even close. Sunday evening, the phone rang, and with it came the first warning shot. My neighbor Janet sounded shaken. She told me strangers were calling around the neighborhood, asking if I seemed confused lately, if my family was worried about my mental health, if I should still be living alone. I'd seen this tactic before. When corrupt people can't beat you legally, they try to erase your credibility. By Monday morning, 3 anonymous complaints had been filed against me with the county. Each one claimed I was unstable, grieving, and harassing officials. It was coordinated, calculated, and sloppy. Veronica thought she could turn me into a problem instead of a witness. She forgot something important. I raised a daughter who makes a living dismantling people exactly like her. Sarah arrived Tuesday afternoon from Portland, briefcase in hand, eyes sharp. She listened without interrupting as I laid everything out. The illegal dam. The bribe. The cover-up. The harassment campaign. When I finished, she closed her notebook and smiled in a way that made me almost feel sorry for Veronica, almost. Wednesday morning, Sarah walked into the county office and dismantled the smear campaign in under 2 hours. Medical records, cognitive assessments, professional credentials. By lunchtime, every claim against me was documented as retaliatory harassment. But Sarah wasn't done. Not even close. That evening, she spread federal statutes across Martha's old dining table. New laws, updated protections. She showed me something I'd missed. Willow Creek feeds directly into a federally monitored watershed. Any illegal modification automatically triggers federal review. But Veronica's concrete dam had done something far worse than divert water. It had created standing pools. Pools that were already attracting vegetation. Pools that were becoming habitat. Sarah pulled up satellite images and pointed to 3 distinct water bodies, forming upstream of the dam, seasonal pools. Exactly the kind protected species depend on. Then she said the word that changed everything. Salamanders. Northwestern. Salamanders. Federally protected. Breeding in shallow pools just like these. That night I couldn't sleep. Not from fear. From anticipation. Veronica thought she was burying a creek. Instead, she'd built a trap so perfect it felt like fate had a sense of humor. The next morning, I checked my trail cameras. There they were, dozens of dark shapes moving gently through the water. Larvae. Proof. That should have been the end of her mistakes. It wasn't. At 2 in the morning, engines roared again, floodlights, jackhammers. Veronica was trying to destroy evidence under cover of darkness. Concrete shattered into the creek, scattering debris everywhere. She claimed emergency repairs. Another lie. But this one backfired spectacularly. Instead of restoring the creek, she created permanent structures. Mini dams, new pools, even better habitat. By sunrise, her cover-up had made the case stronger. By Friday night, sleep was impossible. Not because I was afraid of what Veronica might do next, but because 30 years of experience told me the trap was closing perfectly. Every illegal move she'd made was now feeding directly into federal law. I spent the early hours mapping the creek like I used to map industrial spill sites, GPS coordinates, water flow patterns, every piece of broken concrete carefully documented. The debris she'd scattered in panic had created something extraordinary. Natural-looking check dams, shallow pools connected by gentle riffles, ideal breeding conditions. Veronica had accidentally engineered the healthiest amphibian nursery I'd seen in decades. By sunrise, native plants were already taking hold. I added nothing unnatural, just reinforced what nature was doing on its own. Saturday became strategy day. Sarah arrived with 2 briefcases full of statutes, enforcement manuals, and federal timelines. We turned Martha's dining table into a command center. According to the schedule, the county inspection on Tuesday would trigger immediate federal involvement if protected species were confirmed. No hearings, no appeals, automatic designation by noon. Then Sarah showed me the final piece. Under the updated law, designated habitats require a federal monitor, someone with enforcement authority, someone with experience, someone exactly like me. I'd spent my career enforcing environmental law. Now I could legally protect Martha's Grove forever. Sunday brought the math. Pine Valley's total property value sat around $43 million. Post-designation, maybe 15. HOA fees would become illegal. Landscaping crews banned. Renovations frozen. Veronica's mansion alone would lose nearly $700,000 in value. All of it traced back to her choices. Monday morning, I met the federal assessment team. Dr. Rebecca Declan was practically glowing. She called the site a textbook case of accidental habitat, restoration through environmental crime. She said it would be used as a training example nationwide. I almost laughed at the irony. That evening, Sarah coordinated wildlife observers and photographers. Everything legal. Everything transparent. The story would document itself. By nightfall, there was no stopping what was coming. Tuesday morning arrived clear and calm, the kind of morning Martha loved. I walked through the oak grove one last time before the inspection. The trees were stronger now, leaves vibrant, roots thriving in nutrient-rich soil. Life had reclaimed what greed tried to destroy. Then Veronica appeared, panicked, loud, desperate. She screamed into her phone about stopping the inspection, about property values, about money. And then she made the mistake that ended everything. Standing in front of federal scientists, recording equipment running, she offered cash to make the inspection disappear. $10,000. Just like that, the moment froze in time. By Wednesday morning, the damage was irreversible. The federal habitat designation was already live in public databases, the same ones real estate agents check before they return a phone call. Veronica had 48 hours before her mansion sale was supposed to close, and she knew exactly what that meant. Panic doesn't make people smarter. It makes them reckless. That evening, my neighbor Tom called with a warning. Veronica had scheduled an emergency HOA board meeting at dawn. She was telling everyone the federal designation was temporary, appealable, a misunderstanding. The same lies repeated louder. Sarah and I spent the night reviewing disclosure laws, knowing exactly where this was headed. Before sunrise, I set up across from the clubhouse with binoculars and a camera. Through the glass, I watched Veronica present what looked like official federal documents to the board. My stomach dropped. They were fake, forged environmental clearances claiming the salamanders were seasonal migrants. Sloppy work. Dangerous work. Sarah moved fast. She called the buyer's attorney while I documented everything. I made the hardest call of all directly to the buyers themselves. A retired couple relocating for peace and nature. They had no idea their dream home had become federally protected habitat. The silence on the other end of the line said everything. By mid-afternoon, the sale collapsed. The buyer's attorney recognized the forgeries immediately. The federal signature belonged to a man who had been dead for 3 years. The FBI was notified. Fraud charges followed within hours. Friday afternoon, Pine Valley erupted. The clubhouse overflowed with residents, cameras, and federal officials. What was supposed to be an HOA meeting became a public reckoning. The FBI sat in the front row. Federal biologists prepared their findings. And Veronica stood at the podium, still trying to sell confidence she no longer possessed. She claimed persecution, claimed bias, claimed property rights were under attack. Then a federal agent stood and calmly dismantled every lie. Habitat designation was permanent. There were no appeals. The investigation now included bribery, fraud, and conspiracy. The room exploded. People shouted about lost money, broken promises, lawsuits. Then I stood up. I explained what she'd destroyed, what she'd bribed, what she'd forged, and what she'd accidentally created instead: a protected ecosystem, a permanent conservation zone, a legacy that couldn't be undone by money or manipulation. When I announced I'd accepted the federal habitat monitor position, the room fell silent. For the next 20 years, I would have enforcement authority over the entire area. Martha's Grove would be protected by law, not hope. Veronica snapped. She blamed me, called me bitter, called the salamanders stupid. That's when the handcuffs came out. Federal charges were read aloud. The sound they made closing around her wrists echoed through the room. The moment the handcuffs clicked shut, the room exploded. 200 voices collided at once, questions and accusations ricocheting off the walls. People demanded answers about property values, lawsuits, and how a single decision had collapsed an entire neighborhood's future. The truth was simpler than anyone wanted to admit. This didn't happen overnight. It happened one unethical choice at a time. A federal agent stepped forward and explained what habitat designation actually meant. Property values would drop sharply, but so would taxes. HOA fees would disappear entirely. Landscaping, pools, renovations, everything frozen under federal protection. Some residents shouted in anger. Others sat down slowly, realizing their mortgages were now lighter than they'd ever been. Veronica didn't look like a queen anymore. She looked small, shaken, furious at everyone except herself. As agents led her away, she kept repeating the same line. I was just trying to protect property values. No one responded, because by then, everyone understood what her version of protection had really cost. 8 months later, Pine Valley doesn't look like a luxury development at all. It looks alive. Native grasses replaced manicured lawns. The creek runs clear over natural stone. Salamanders thrive in pools that never existed before her crime. Property taxes dropped to a fraction of what they were. HOA fees vanished. Federal grants now cover restoration costs. Veronica's mansion sold at foreclosure for less than $200,000. It's now a research station run by an environmental science professor. Mike Castellanos resigned and testified. Veronica went to federal prison for wire fraud, forgery, corruption, and conspiracy. No appeals, no shortcuts, just consequences. As for me, I became the federal habitat monitor. $68,000 a year, health insurance, a badge, and the authority to protect this land permanently. I've turned away developers, issued citations, and watched nature reclaim what greed tried to erase. The oak grove Martha planted is thriving, stronger than ever. My daughter brings her kids every weekend now. They learn about salamanders, water cycles, and why laws exist in the first place. The local school uses the site as an outdoor classroom. Conservation groups study it as a case example. Sometimes in the evening, I sit where Martha used to sit and listen to the creek. I tell her about the beavers that moved in, about the herons nesting in the trees, about how her quiet place became something that will outlive all of us. Veronica thought power meant control. She forgot that real power is accountability. And sometimes justice doesn't just punish the wrong thing. It protects what truly matters. Martha asked me to fight for this place. I kept my promise. The morning sun broke over Willow Creek, filtering through the leaves of Martha's oak grove, painting the water in streaks of gold and green. The creek was no longer just water flowing. Past our property, it was a lifeline for an ecosystem born from mistakes, greed, and eventual justice. I stood at the creek bank with binoculars, documenting every salamander in the shallow pools. Hundreds of larvae darted among rocks, invisible to an untrained eye but vivid evidence of thriving life. My daughter Sarah and her 2 girls tiptoed along the bank, notebooks in hand, eagerly sketching plants, water movement, and amphibian life. 8 months had transformed everything. Native plants had spread naturally along the creek. The oak trees Martha planted had recovered completely from the flooding damage, and now offered shade and habitat for birds, squirrels, and insects. The air was rich with the smell of wet earth and blooming wildflowers. I breathed deeply, savoring the quiet triumph of nature reclaiming what had been nearly destroyed. The creek's waters sparkled as if thanking us for the careful protection it now received under federal law. As a federal habitat monitor, my days had changed completely. I walked these banks making careful notes, photographing salamander pools, checking water flow, and recording vegetation growth. Every observation had purpose. Every note carried authority. I could enforce federal environmental law in this area, ensuring that Martha's Grove would never again be threatened by short-sighted greed. Developers who once dreamed of luxury, estates in Pine Valley had learned the hard way that federal protection overrode HOA desires, property speculation, and fraudulent manipulation. The local school had begun using the site for their environmental curriculum. On Friday mornings, 35 fourth graders arrived with magnifying glasses, clipboards, and contagious enthusiasm. Sarah helped lead lessons, pointing out salamander larvae, native plant species, and demonstrating natural water filtration. Even the beaver family upstream, building their dam, became part of a practical ecosystem study. Each student left with a sense of responsibility, understanding the balance between human activity and nature's delicate systems. I watched my granddaughters scribble in their notebooks, chattering excitedly about the salamanders in Oak Grove. Martha would have been proud beyond words. But this transformation wasn't just ecological, it was personal. The creek that once brought Martha peace during her final days now carried the laughter of children, the excitement of discovery, and the calm of thriving wildlife. Every step along the banks reminded me of her words. Don't let them destroy beautiful things just because they. And for the first time since her passing, I felt the universe had balanced itself. Justice had not only punished wrongdoing but protected the beauty she cherished. The air inside the Pine Valley clubhouse felt electric, thick with anticipation and tension. Residents whispered urgently, casting glances toward the front, where the federal environmental team had set up photographic displays and official habitat documentation. I stood quietly at the back, my eyes scanning the crowd. Faces of neighbors who had once admired Veronica's strict management of the community now reflected a mix of shock, confusion, and awe. This was more than a confrontation, it was a revelation. At the front, FBI Special Agent Maria Santos adjusted her badge and addressed the room, her voice firm and clear. This investigation involves multiple federal violations, including corruption, bribery, and environmental crimes affecting endangered species habitats. We are here to ensure compliance with federal law and to protect these ecosystems for generations to come. Gasps rippled through the audience. Even longtime residents who had argued about HOA fees or landscaping rules felt the weight of what was unfolding. Veronica Ashworth, once so confident and commanding, appeared visibly shaken. She tried to assert control, speaking rapidly about routine inspections, temporary misunderstandings, and exaggerations by disgruntled neighbors. But every word she uttered collided with the tangible evidence displayed before her: photographs of thriving salamander pools, satellite images showing wetland expansion, and federal correspondence confirming habitat protection. The contrast was undeniable. David Park, the federal environmental specialist, stepped forward, pointing to images of the creek and pools. This habitat represents the healthiest northwestern salamander breeding population documented in this watershed in over 20 years. Any modifications or interference with this environment are strictly prohibited under federal law. Enforcement is immediate and irrevocable. Veronica's hands trembled as she glanced at the documents. She had underestimated the law, the species, and the authority she was now confronting. I watched quietly as neighbors processed the implications. Property values would be permanently altered, maintenance restrictions enforced, and any attempt to circumvent the federal designations could result in severe penalties. And yet there was a sense of satisfaction. a justice that resonated deeply within the room. For months, Veronica had manipulated officials, intimidated residents, and tried to erase her misdeeds. Now, the very ecosystem she had attempted to control and exploit was protecting itself, and all who had respected or ignored the rules would witness the consequences. From the back, I could see Sarah standing beside me, notebook in hand, eyes sharp, documenting the reactions of the HOA board and neighbors alike. She whispered, "Every action they took to manipulate the system has been captured. They can't argue with federal evidence." The calm morning air in Pine Valley had shifted to something unrecognizable. Panic, wrapped in disbelief, whispered speculation, and the audible rustle of papers as residents tried to understand the unprecedented situation unfolding before them. Across the neighborhood, I could see faces pressed against windows, neighbors stepping outside their homes to witness the federal assessment taking place on their very streets. This wasn't just about property lines or HOA fees anymore. This was a legal, environmental, and moral reckoning. Veronica Ashworth, who had once moved through these streets like a monarch surveying her kingdom, now moved with an unsteady gait. Her phone clutched tightly. She barked into it, her words clipped, urgent. $10,000 here, a favor there. None of her typical manipulations mattered anymore. Federal law had intervened, and every carefully orchestrated bribe, forgery, and half-truth she had relied upon was now nullified by objective science and unassailable evidence. The environmental specialists worked methodically, documenting every pool, riffle, and concrete fragment left from the midnight demolition. Shallow pools, unexpectedly perfect for salamander breeding, reflected the sun like liquid glass, teeming with tiny dark shapes that would ensure federal protection. Each observation, each photograph, added to the airtight documentation that would soon become an indelible part of the federal record. From the curbside, neighbors whispered urgently to one another. How could their pristine, million-dollar streets be suddenly impacted by salamanders? What did this mean for property taxes, HOA restrictions, or even the resale of their homes? While the economic consequences were devastating, there was also a quiet acknowledgement that a small, often overlooked ecosystem had just been saved from destruction. And the irony was not lost on anyone. Human greed had inadvertently created one of the most significant habitat protections in decades. I observed Veronica cornered near her mansion, the familiar poise of a seasoned sales executive, replaced with a tension so sharp it was almost audible. Every glance toward the federal team, every snap of a camera, every scribbled note in their official logs was a reminder that her manipulations had failed. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of poetic justice, and in the middle of it stood Martha's oak grove, vibrant and thriving, untouched by human malice. Neighbors started murmuring to one another, many with growing admiration, others with disbelief. The legal implications became clear. Federal habitat designation meant no further development, no irrigation systems, no landscaping crews, and permanent protection under environmental law. Those who had questioned the value of federal regulations now saw them in action, tangible, immediate, and powerful. From my vantage point near the edge of the newly protected wetland, by mid-morning, the full scope of Veronica Ashworth's miscalculations became apparent to everyone who had eyes to see. Martha's oak grove, once a fragile symbol of love and resilience, now thrived under the careful observation of federal scientists. Every tree, every leaf, every shaded pool told a story not of destruction, but of survival and triumph. For decades I had walked these grounds alongside Martha, listening to her whispering encouragements to the saplings we planted together. Now that sacred space was not just preserved, it was officially protected. Sarah and I moved methodically through the grove, reviewing GPS coordinates, noting pool formations, and making sure every detail was accurately recorded. Federal observers followed our steps, cataloging each salamander cluster and documenting the unique vegetation that had naturally sprouted around the accidental pools. The wetland was vibrant, full of life, and completely immune to the manipulation of property developers or corrupt officials. What had started as a personal crusade had evolved into a model case for environmental restoration through accidental human intervention. Across the way, Veronica's mansion loomed, a symbol of the power she once wielded. But the panic that gripped her this morning was palpable even from a distance. The carefully orchestrated world she had built was collapsing. Under the weight of unyielding federal law, irrefutable evidence, and ecological reality, every frantic call she made, every demand shouted at assistants or contractors, was carefully noted by federal documentation teams. They were recording her desperation, her recognition of the irreversible consequences, and her attempts to circumvent justice. Neighbors gathered quietly along the periphery of the protected area, whispering among themselves, a mix of shock, curiosity, and awe on their faces. No longer just spectators. They were witnesses to the undeniable power of federal environmental authority. The pools that once threatened to be drained or altered now served as proof of both the ecosystem's resilience and Veronica's catastrophic errors. In a way, it was poetic justice. Her attempts to manipulate the environment for convenience and profit had created an irreplaceable ecological treasure. As Sarah updated the federal database on habitat metrics, I felt a surge of satisfaction, not for revenge but for restoration. This was the culmination of decades of environmental advocacy, technical knowledge, and perseverance. The salamanders moved through the pools unbothered, oblivious to the human drama but living symbols of triumph over greed and negligence. Each photo, each note, each careful measurement ensured that nothing could reverse the gains we had secured. By late morning, it was undeniable. Pine Valley would never be the same. Federal designation was official, and any further attempt at manipulation, bribery, or construction without compliance would carry severe consequences. By Thursday afternoon, the consequences of Veronica Ashworth's hubris had reached a public crescendo. Pine Valley residents gathered, drawn by rumors of federal intervention, environmental disaster, and an unprecedented clash between HOA authority and federal law. The clubhouse steps and pool deck overflowed with anxious homeowners, cameras flashing, phones recording, whispers and gasps echoing through the crowd. The air was thick with tension, and every eye turned toward the epicenter of chaos, Veronica, attempting to retain control of a situation she could no longer manipulate. Veronica's corporate poise was cracking visibly. Her dark power suit, intended to convey authority, now seemed like armor against an invisible enemy she could not conquer. She gestured wildly, calling over assistants and board members, demanding explanations, instructing people to contact lawyers. Each movement, each shout, was being meticulously documented by federal, environmental specialists and FBI agents. The irony was unmistakable. All her strategies to bypass law, manipulate officials, and control property sales had created a permanent, legally protected ecological reserve. Standing at the edge of the crowd, I watched as Maria Santos, FBI Environmental Crimes Unit agent, moved toward Veronica. Her badge glinted in the sunlight, and her calm, measured stride contrasted sharply with Veronica's frantic pacing. The residents quieted as she addressed the group, explaining in clear, authoritative terms the scope of federal habitat designation. No appeal process existed for habitats with established breeding populations of protected species. Federal law was absolute. Federal enforcement was immediate. The magnitude of Veronica's error began to sink in across the assembled neighbors. Simultaneously, federal environmental scientists documented the salamander pools and native vegetation, taking photographs, GPS readings, and notes for the official report. The accidental wetlands, once a source of conflict, were now a tangible demonstration of regulatory power and ecological resilience. Each pool reflected sunlight, moving gently as the salamanders navigated their newly permanent home. The natural beauty of the scene contrasted sharply with the human tension, just yards away. Residents whispered, some angry, some fascinated. As the true implications became clear, property values would decrease dramatically, maintenance fees were effectively nullified, and future modifications would require federal oversight and permits. Veronica's mansion and the entire HOA faced an irreversible legal and ecological reality. The attempts at intimidation, bribery, and deception had failed spectacularly, leaving the community both amazed and, for many, vindicated. I remained calm, observing each interaction, knowing that Martha's Grove and the salamanders were protected forever. Sarah stood beside me, tablet in hand, monitoring documentation and communication logs. By the following week, the chaos of federal intervention had begun to settle, and a profound sense of calm enveloped Pine Valley. Martha's Oak Grove, once threatened by illegal concrete diversion, now stood taller and stronger than ever. Each tree bore the subtle scars of past flooding, yet their new growth symbolized resilience, hope, and the culmination of justice. The salamander pools, previously overlooked and underestimated, had become the centerpiece of a thriving ecosystem. Northwestern salamanders darted among aquatic plants, undisturbed by human interference, while native vegetation flourished along the creek banks. I walked through the grove, observing each pool, documenting every movement, ensuring that federal protections were effectively implemented. As the newly appointed federal habitat monitor, I carried not just the authority, but the responsibility to protect every inch of this designated area. My EPA badge and official documentation granted me enforcement powers that reached far beyond what I could have imagined. Each citation, every regulation enforcement was grounded in law, not opinion. My years of environmental enforcement experience merged seamlessly with a personal mission inspired by Martha's memory, creating a unique combination of expertise and purpose. Sarah remained by my side, her legal acumen ensuring that our actions were precise, defensible, and strategically sound. Together, we managed the interface between federal law, local homeowners, and the restored ecosystem. The residents of Pine Valley, initially angry and bewildered by federal designation, began to recognize the long-term benefits. While property values had decreased, maintenance obligations diminished drastically, and federal grants ensured restoration projects were fully funded. Homeowners like Tom Bradley saw their properties repaired at federal expense, and former concerns about landscaping, pools, and irrigation vanished under strict legal oversight. Conservation measures once perceived as burdensome were gradually understood as protections for an irreplaceable natural resource that now belonged to everyone, yet would be managed responsibly. Education became a central component of the Habitat program. Local school children arrived weekly, eagerly exploring wetlands, observing amphibians, and learning the importance of environmental stewardship. Dr. Declan led hands-on lessons in ecology, highlighting how regulatory enforcement can intersect with conservation in real-world scenarios. My own conversations with students, demonstrating salamander life cycles and wetland restoration techniques, emphasized the tangible impact of legal protections when combined with careful environmental management. The grove had transformed from a private memorial into a community resource, a living classroom, and a model of successful ecological intervention. Evenings in Martha's Oak Grove became a time of reflection. The final chapter of Pine Valley's transformation was not marked by confrontation, but by enduring harmony. 8 months had passed since the federal habitat designation, and every corner of Martha's Oak Grove reflected resilience, ecological restoration, and justice served. What had once been a battleground for corruption and greed had evolved into a living testament to the power of environmental law, personal dedication, and community vigilance. The creek flowed naturally over stone beds. The salamander pools thrived with their new generations, and native plants reclaimed land that had once been sterile under manicured lawns. The air carried the scent of wildflowers and the gentle sounds of rippling water, woodpeckers tapping in the oaks, and beavers engineering upstream dams with effortless skill. As the federal habitat monitor, I felt the weight and privilege of protecting this sanctuary. Each day brought inspections, documentation, and strategic enforcement to ensure no unauthorized modifications disrupted the ecosystem. My badge and legal authority granted me the ability to enforce protections, issue citations, and preserve Martha's vision permanently. Sarah remained my steadfast partner, bridging legal expertise and environmental enforcement to ensure that the restoration was flawless and lasting. Together we had turned what began as personal loss and neighborhood conflict into a nationally recognized model of accidental habitat restoration through environmental crimes. The community, initially outraged by property value losses and disrupted routines, gradually embraced the transformation. Homeowners like Tom Bradley celebrated restored foundations and reduced tax burdens. Federal grants funded maintenance and habitat restoration, while property owners were shielded from unnecessary expenses. The educational impact was profound. Every Friday morning, 35 fourth graders arrived with magnifying glasses and field notebooks, guided by Dr. Declan and Sarah, learning firsthand about wetland ecology, amphibian life cycles, and environmental stewardship. Martha's Grove, once a private memorial, had become a living classroom, a sanctuary for wildlife, and a legacy for future generations. Evenings were the most poignant. I often sat in Martha's old chair, gazing over the creek, logging salamander egg masses, and reflecting on the journey. The grove had transformed from a site of grief and conflict into a beacon of hope. Learning and environmental triumph. Beavers maintained their upstream structures. Salamanders multiplied. Birds nested in oak branches, and the creek's rhythm matched the heartbeat of the land. Every observation reaffirmed that persistence, law, and integrity could safeguard what mattered most. Veronica Ashworth's downfall remained a cautionary tale. Federal prison and restitution ensured accountability, while the community recognized the power of vigilance against corruption.